There are 119 marks cut into the center beam of my cabin. One for every winter I've lived through up here on the Powder River bench, cut the morning the last of the spring thaw runs off the north slope, and I know for certain I made it. My father started the count. I kept it going after him, because a man out here learns fast that the only thing worth counting is the thing that can kill you and didn't. The winter I'm about to tell you about, I almost didn't cut the mark. Not because I nearly died, though I did come close, closer than I like to admit. I almost didn't cut it because for 3 days that January I forgot to be afraid of the storm at all. I forgot the cold. I forgot the count. And a man who forgets the cold up here usually forgets it permanently. She's the reason. A woman I found half buried in a drift with her lips gone the color of a dead sky, left out there to freeze by the very people who'd sworn to see her home. I didn't know her name yet. I didn't know I'd spend the rest of my life measuring winters against the one she walked into mine. Stay with me, I'll tell it the way it happened, the wind and all. Just know before I start, I am not a brave man and I am not a good one. I am only a man who was outside at the wrong hour on the one night it mattered. The mare felt it before I did. That's the first thing I remember, Juno stopping cold in the trail with her ears pinned flat and her whole body gone stiff under me, the way she does when there's a wolf downwind or a rattler in the grass in July. Except it was January, and there was nothing downwind but white. I'd ridden out at dusk to bring in the last 4 head that had drifted up the coulee, and the light was already failing, and the snow had started coming sideways in that fine, mean way that means the real weather is still an hour off but coming fast. Go on, I told her, ain't nothing out here. She didn't go on. She turned her head hard to the left, toward the low willow break along the dry creek, and she made a sound in her chest I'd only heard her make twice before, both times over dead things. I almost rode past. God help me, I almost did. I had 4 cows to bring in and a storm at my back and a fire going cold in an empty cabin, and every sensible bone in my body said the mare had spooked at a coyote and I should get about my business. I had my heels in her flanks. I had the reins turned toward home. Then I saw the color. Everything out there was white and gray and the dead brown of frozen willow. Everything except one small patch of blue down in the drift where the creek bent. Wrong blue. A store-bought blue, a dress goods blue, a color that had no reason to be lying in a snowbank 11 miles from the nearest human roof. I sat there a moment with my heart doing something ugly, telling myself it was a rag, a bit of tent canvas, anything. Then the blue moved. I was off the mare before I'd made the decision to be. I went down that bank on my heels and my backside, snow driving into my collar, and I got to her and I said her name before I knew she had one. I just said, "Hey, hey now," the way you talk to a spooked animal, and I got my arms under her and turned her over. She was young, younger than me by a good 10 years, I'd guess, though the cold makes it hard to read a face. Her lips had gone that blue-gray that I have learned to hate, and there was frost caught in her eyelashes, and when I got her turned, she made a sound, not a word, just a thin, cracked breath of a sound, and her eyes came half open and looked at me without any hope in them at all. That's the part I can't shake even now. Not the cold. The look. Like she'd already made peace with dying, and was mildly put out to be interrupted. "You're all right," I lied. "I've got you, you're all right." She wasn't all right. Her hands, when I peeled them off her own arms, were the hard pale of a thing already frozen, and she had no coat, in that weather just the blue dress and a thin gray shawl gone stiff with ice, and a single boot. The other foot was wrapped in what looked like a torn strip of petticoat soaked through. Somebody had done that wrapping. Somebody had knelt in the snow and torn cloth and bound her foot and then left her. That's the thought that hit me and wouldn't leave. Somebody bound her foot and then walked away. I got my own coat off and around her. I got her up over my shoulder. She weighed nothing. She weighed like a sack of feed with half the grain gone, and I fought back up that bank with the wind pushing me sideways the whole way. And I got her belly down over Juno's withers and myself up behind, and I turned that mare for home, and I forgot about the 4 cows entirely. Let them freeze. I'm not proud of the thought, but it's an honest one. Let every cow I own freeze solid. I had already made a different kind of count in my head, and cows weren't in it. The ride back was the longest 3 miles of my life, and I've ridden some long ones. The storm came on for real halfway home, the way it does. 1 minute you can see the trail, and the next the whole world goes to a roar and a whiteness, and you're navigating by the tilt of the ground and the memory of your own land. I kept one hand fisted in the woman's shawl to hold her on and gave Juno her head, because a horse knows the way to its own barn better than any man knows anything. and I talked. I don't know why I talked. She couldn't hear me over the wind and she was half gone anyway, but I kept up a low, steady stream of nothing all the way home, about the fire I'd build and the coffee I'd make and how she'd be warm inside the hour. And I think now I was talking to keep myself from panicking. A man out here alone gets in the habit of narrating his own survival to himself. My father did it. I caught it from him like a cough. When the cabin came out of the white, I could have wept. I got her down and inside and laid her on my own bed, and then I stood there a full stupid second not knowing what to do first, because I'd never had a person in this cabin who wasn't me. It had been 11 years since anyone had. I built up the fire until it roared. I got the wet clothes off her, and I'll say it plain so you don't wonder. There was nothing in me right then but fear. I was terrified of her hands and her feet and the color of them. I have gelded calves with steadier fingers than I had unlacing that ruined boot. Her feet were the worst of it, the wrapped one especially. I'd seen frostbite before. I'd lost 2 toes of my own to it in the winter of my 40th mark, and I knew that I could not warm those feet by the fire, not fast. That fast warming a frozen thing is how you lose it. So I did what my father taught me. I filled the wash basin with snowmelt gone barely warm, warm as a spring pond and no warmer, and I put her feet in it, and I held them there and I waited. She started shivering around midnight, which I knew was good. The shivering means the bodies decided to fight. The ones who scare you are the ones gone too cold to shake. And along about then she started to come up out of wherever she'd been. Her eyes opened, and this time there was something in them. Fear, mostly. She looked at the cabin, at the fire, at me kneeling by the basin with her bare foot in my 2 hands. And she went rigid all over and pulled the foot back hard. "Easy," I said. "Easy now. You're froze near through. I'm just trying to save your feet, that's all. I'm not anything to be scared of." Which is a thing every dangerous man in history has probably said, and I heard how it sounded even as I said it, and I let go of her foot and sat back on my heels and put my hands where she could see them, empty, open. "My name's Wheeze," I said. "Wesley Cade, this is my place. You're on the Powder River up the North Bench. You went into the creek drift about 3 miles from here. My horse found you." I said it slow and flat, the way you read facts off a page, because she needed facts. People who have been through a bad thing don't need comfort first. They need to know where they are. She didn't say anything for a long while. She pulled the blanket up to her chin and watched me and shivered, and I let her. And I got up slow and made coffee and put a good spoon of sugar in it and set it on the floor within her reach and backed off to the far side of the room to my chair. And I sat down, and I waited some more. Waiting is the one thing I'm properly good at. You spend enough winters alone, you get real accomplished at it. After a time, a long time, the coffee half gone cold, she said, in a voice like a rusted hinge. "Are they still out there?" "Who?" "The wagons," she swallowed. It looked like it hurt. The party, the Vances. "Are they still out there, or did they get through?" And there it was, the first thread of it. I didn't know yet what she was asking me. I thought at first she was worried for them, that these Vances were her people, and she was frightened they'd been caught in the same storm. And I said something to soothe her, said they'd surely have fortayed up somewhere and waited it out, that folks who travel in winter know to hole up. Something crossed her face when I said no to hole up. Something that wasn't relief. Her jaw went hard and her eyes went bright and wet all at once, and she looked at the fire instead of at me, and she said, very quiet, "They didn't stop for me." I didn't understand her yet. I said, "How's that?" "The wagon threw a wheel 2 days back. Mr. Vance said we'd lost too much time already, said the pass would close if we stopped to mend it proper. So they doubled up and left the wagon in my trunk, and her voice did something then, went thin and climbed and cracked, and she pressed her cracked lips together hard until she had it back under control, and it took her a while. I didn't rush her. I have never in my life been so still. There wasn't room, she said finally. Doubled up like that, there wasn't room in the other wagons. Not for extra weight. That's how Mrs. Vance put it. Extra weight. And I'd hired on as a girl to mind their children, so I didn't have any say in it. Mr. Vance said I could ride the spare mule to the next settlement, said it was only a day's walk if the mule gave out. She looked at her wrapped foot then, the one somebody had bound before they left her. "Mule gave out," she said. "Yesterday, or the day before, I've lost the days." She was crying now without seeming to notice she was, the tears just running down and freezing partway and her not wiping them. "Mrs. Vance bound my foot before they went. I'd twisted it in the trace. She bound it up nice and told me to keep walking and follow the wheel ruts, and I would surely catch them up at the settlement." A sound came out of her that was almost a laugh and was the worst sound I'd heard all night. catch them up on a bad foot. In this, I sat there in my chair with my cold coffee and I understood, finally, what I was looking at. Not a woman lost in a storm. A woman left in a storm. Bound up kindly and pointed at the horizon and abandoned, so that everyone could tell themselves afterward that they hadn't quite murdered her, that they'd given her a chance, hadn't they? They'd bound her foot. They'd pointed the way. And if the cold took her, that was between her and God and not their doing at all. I have known cruelty out here. The country's full of it. But I'd never come so close to the tidy, careful, church-going kind. The kind that binds your foot before it walks off and leaves you to die. And it made something go very cold and very still in the center of me. Colder than the storm outside, and it stayed cold a long time. I got up and I put another log on the fire, even though the fire didn't need it, because I needed to do something with my hands. "What's your name?" I asked her with my back to her, watching the sparks go up. "Nell," she said. "Nell Sutcliffe." "Well, Nell Sutcliffe." I turned around. "You're not extra weight here. There's nothing here but me and 119 winters and enough beans and salt pork to see 2 people through to the thaw. You're going to keep those feet if I have any say in it, and you're going to sleep in that bed as long as you need it, and I'll take the floor by the fire. And come spring, if you want to go find the Vances, I'll ride you to them myself." I heard my own voice go rough on the next part, and I didn't try to hide it. "But you're not going back out in that. Not tonight. Not for anything. You understand me." She stared at me, and then she did a thing that near broke me. She flinched. She flinched like a struck dog, like kindness was a hand raised over her, because she'd learned somewhere along that road that when a person offered you shelter, you had best brace for what it would cost you. I saw her do the arithmetic. I saw her try to figure out what I'd want in return. "I don't have any money," she said carefully. "I didn't ask for any. I don't have—" Her chin came up, and there was a hardness in it, a readiness, and I understood that too, and it made me sick. "Whatever you're going to want," she said. "I want to know it now, so I'm not surprised later." I looked at her a long moment. Outside, the wind screamed against the cabin like a living thing that wanted in, and the fire popped, and the whole world was 3 miles of white in every direction with the 2 of us the only warm things in it. "I want you to drink that coffee before it goes stone cold," I said. "That's the whole of what I want. There isn't going to be a later that's any different from now." I don't think she believed me. I wouldn't have believed me either. But she picked up the coffee with both shaking hands and she drank it, watching me over the rim the whole time. And I turned my chair to face the fire and the door instead of the bed so she'd have my back and know I meant it. And I sat up the rest of that night feeding the fire and listening to the storm try to kill us and fail. Somewhere near dawn, I heard her breathing go slow and even, finally, in real sleep. And I sat there in the red firelight with 2 toes gone from my own left foot in a winter 12 marks back, thinking about kindness that binds your foot before it leaves you, and I made a promise to myself I didn't say out loud. I've kept it too. That's the part I'm least ashamed of in this whole story. Whatever else I got wrong, and I got plenty wrong before spring, you'll hear it all, I kept that one. The storm blew itself out on the 3rd day, and that's when the real trouble started. That's a thing folks who have never wintered up here don't understand. The storm isn't the enemy. The storm is loud and it's honest. It comes at you head-on and you know exactly what it wants. It's the after that kills you. The still white morning when the wind quits and the sun comes up hard and falls over a world gone silent and everything looks healed and it is not healed at all. That's when the frostbite you thought you'd beaten turns on you. That's when the thing you saved starts to rot. I knew it before Nell did. I'd been watching her foot for 3 days. The good foot had come back the way a frozen thing is supposed to, red, then angry, then merely sore, the toes wriggling when I asked them to, the color creeping back up out of the flesh like sap. I'd have cut a mark for that foot alone if marks were for such things. But the wrapped foot, the one the Vance woman had bound so kindly before she left, that one wasn't coming back. The 2 smallest toes had gone from white to a waxy yellow, and then to color I don't have a good word for. Gray, but wrong. Gray like meat left out. And on the 3rd morning, the still bright, terrible morning after the wind quit, I peeled back the cloth and I smelled it before I saw it, and my stomach dropped clean through the floor. Nell saw my face. She'd gotten good in 3 days at reading my face. A woman who's been left to die learns to read faces fast, learns to catch the weather in a man's eyes before it breaks. And she said, "It's bad, isn't it?" Not as a question, and I didn't lie to her because I'd made a private rule not to that first night. "It's bad," I said. She looked at the foot for a long time. I watched her look at it. She didn't cry, which somehow was worse than if she had. She just looked at those two gray toes the way you'd look at something that used to be yours and wasn't anymore, and then she said in a flat, steady voice that scared me more than any weeping could have, "You have to take them off, don't you?" "Nell, I've seen it done." She said it fast, getting it out before her nerve could quit. "On the trail, a man named Corley, he got his fingers. They waited too long being gentle about it, and the black went up his hand and then up his arm, and then he died of it, screaming in a wagon in July. I watched it happen over 11 days. Her jaw worked. "Don't be gentle. Being gentle is what killed Corley. Being gentle is what—" She stopped. She didn't finish it, but I knew where it was going. Being gentle is what the Vances called it when they bound my foot and left me. Being gentle is a thing this country does to you right before it walks away. So I want to tell you about a decision now, and I want to tell it honest, because I've dressed it up prettier in my head over the years, and I owe her better than that. I did not want to take her toes. Not because of the blood, I've butchered enough to not mind blood, but because I was afraid. Plain afraid. Afraid I'd do it wrong, afraid I'd cut too much or too little, afraid the rot was already past her toes and into her foot and I'd be cutting for nothing, cutting her up and hurting her and losing her anyway like that man Corley in the wagon in July. And I stood there in my own cabin with 119 winters cut into the beam over my head, and I understood that not one of those winters had taught me the one thing I needed right then, and I have never felt smaller. But Nell was watching me, and I remembered how she'd flinched that first night when I offered her shelter, braced for the cost of it, and I understood that if I hesitated now, if I let her see me be afraid, she'd read it as me deciding she wasn't worth the trouble, just like they had, and I would sooner have cut off my own foot than let her think that for a single second. So I put my fear somewhere she couldn't see it, the way you learn to out here, and I said, "All right." I said, "But not now. Now we get you fed and we get whiskey in you. I've got most of a bottle I keep for the cold, and I get my knife properly hot, and we do it right once this afternoon while the light's good. And you're going to hold onto the bed frame and cuss me to hell and gone, and I'm going to let you, and by supper it'll be done and behind us. All right." She nodded, and then she reached out. This is the part I remember. She reached out and she took my hand, the first time she'd touched me on purpose, and her grip was so much stronger than I expected from a woman who'd near froze to death 3 days back, and she said, "Wesley Cade, if you save my life twice in 1 week, I'm going to have an awful hard time believing you don't want something for it. I want you to stop talking so I can sharpen my knife," I said, and she laughed, a real one this time, surprised out of her, and I went to sharpen my knife so she wouldn't see that my hands had started to shake. I'm not going to tell you every part of the afternoon. Some things a man keeps. I'll tell you she was braver than I was. I'll tell you she gripped that bed frame and she cursed like a mule skinner, and once she screamed, one short scream she bit off hard, and then she went white and quiet and breathed through it, and never once did she pull away or ask me to stop, even when stopping was all I wanted in the world. I'll tell you the rot had stopped just past the 2 toes. Thank God, thank whatever's out there. The flesh past the cut ran clean and pink and bled honest red. And when I saw that clean pink, I could have wept for the second time in a week, me who hadn't wept in a decade. I packed it and I bound it. I bound it the way that Vance woman should have bound it, meaning to come back, meaning to check it, meaning to keep the person attached to the foot. And Nell passed out somewhere in the last of it, from the whiskey and the hurt, and I sat with her the whole night with my hand on her ankle feeling for the fever that would tell me I'd failed. The fever didn't come. By the 4th morning her color was good and she was asking for food and cussing me for the whiskey headache, and I went outside into the blinding still cold, and I stood in the snow and I shook for about 10 minutes, all the fear coming out of me at once now that it was safe to, and then I went and I did the chores. That's the thing nobody tells you about surviving. After the worst of it, there are still chores. The cows I'd abandoned, I found 3 of the 4 alive, fortied up in the willow brake where they'd had the sense to go, and the 4th dead and frozen, and I felt about that dead cow the way you'd feel about a debt you knew you'd have to pay. I'd chosen Nell over the herd. The herd had sent me a bill, fair enough. We fell into a way of being, the 2 of us, over the days that followed. I want to tell you about it because it's the part of the whole business I'd live over again if I could. She couldn't walk, not for a good while, so she took over everything a sitting-down person could do, and she did it fierce, like she had to earn her air. She mended. God, she mended. She went through my whole sorry pile of torn everything and fixed it, socks I'd given up for dead, a coat I'd been meaning to throw out for 6 winters. She cooked, once she could reach the stove from a chair I fixed up for her, and she cooked better than I'd eaten since my mother died. She talked. That surprised me most. I'd taken her for a quiet one those first days, but that was the cold and the fear talking. And as she healed, the real Nell came up out of it like the color coming back into her feet. And the real Nell had opinions, and a wicked dry humor, and a way of catching me out in my own foolishness that I hadn't had done to me since my father passed. "You count them," she said one evening, catching me at the beam. I hadn't known she'd noticed. "The marks." "What are they?" "Winters," I said. "One for everyone I've lived through. My father started it." She looked at the beam a long while. 119 of them, most in my father's hand, the last dozen or so in mine. "That's a strange thing to count," she said. "It's the only thing worth counting up here." "No, it isn't." She said it gentle but sure, the way she'd taken to saying things to me. "You count the winters you survived. Seems to me a man could just as easy count what he survived them for." And she went back to her mending and left me standing there feeling like I'd been struck across the face with a truth I'd been ducking my whole life. I didn't cut a mark that spring. You should know that now. When the thaw came, I couldn't do it. Not because I'd forgotten, because Nell had ruined the counting for me, made me see it for the sad little tally it was. 119 winters and nothing to show but the fact of them. I've never cut another mark. The count stops at 119, and it'll die with me at 119, and that's her doing, and it's the best thing anybody ever did to me. But I told you at the start that I got things wrong before spring, and here's the first of it, and it's the one I'm most ashamed of. I started to want her to stay. Not in the way she'd braced for that first night. I never once touched her but to doctor her, and I want that understood. But in a way that was maybe worse, or at least more selfish, because it was quieter and I could hide it even from myself. I started arranging things so she'd need me. I found reasons the trail wasn't safe yet when it was getting safe. I was slow, real slow, to mention the settlement 40 miles south where she could catch on with a decent family. Slow to mention the spring wagons that come through the pass once it opened. 11 years I'd wintered alone, and I'd told myself I liked it. And here was this woman filling my cabin with mending and cook smell and that dry laugh. And the thought of the thaw opening the pass and taking her back out of my life made something in me clamp down mean and frightened. And I started, quietly, in ways I could pretend were just caution, I started keeping her. She caught me at it, of course she did. She caught me at everything. It was a warm day in the fall spring, the eaves dripping, the snow gone gray and sinking, and she was up walking on the mended foot with a stick I'd cut her. Walking better every day, and she stopped by the door and looked out at the softening trail south, and she said, without turning around, "The pass'll be open inside a month." "Might be," I said. "Might not. Late storms this high up. I've seen June snows." "Wesley," she turned around, and her face wasn't angry, that's what got me. It was kind, and it was sad, and it saw right through me, straight through to the frightened, selfish thing I'd been hiding even from myself. "You keep telling me it's not safe yet. It's getting safe. You know it's getting safe. You told me the very first night you'd ride me to wherever I wanted to go come spring." She let that sit. "Are you a liar then, after all this?" And there it was. She'd taken the one thing I was proud of, my rule, my private rule. There isn't going to be a later that's any different from now, and she'd held it up in front of me and shown me I'd started to break it. Not with my hands, with my slyness. I'd started to make her a prisoner of kindness, the exact thing the Vances had done to her, only slower and gentler and dressed up as concern for her safety, and if I'd let it run, I'd have been no better than them. I'd have been worse, because I'd have known better and done it anyway. I stood there with the eaves dripping, and I could not say a word. "I'm not saying I want to go," she said, softer now, and it cost her to say it. I could see it cost her. "I'm saying you have to let it be my choice. You of all people, you have to let it be a thing I choose, or it's not worth anything. Do you understand me?" I understood her. I understood her the way you understand the thing you've been most afraid to look at, all at once and too late and completely. "The pass'll be open inside a month," I agreed, and my voice came out wrecked. "And when it opens, I'll saddle Juno and I'll ride you anywhere you name, the settlement, the coast, back to the Vances if you want them, though God knows why you would, anywhere. And I won't," I had to stop and get it back. "I won't say another word about the weather that isn't true. You have my word. My real word this time, not the sly kind." She crossed the room to me on her stick and her mended foot, and she stood close, closer than she'd stood since I doctored her. And she looked up at me with those eyes that had had no hope in them the night I found her and had plenty in them now, and she said, "That's all I wanted, the choosing." And then, because she was Nell and could never let a heavy moment stand without knocking it down a peg, "You are the most frightened, brave man I have ever met in my life, Wesley Cade." And I laughed because it was true, and because I didn't know what else to do with everything I was feeling. And outside the eaves dripped, and the pass up country sat still under its ice. A month from opening, a month from a choice I'd promised to let her make and was terrified she'd make wrong, or worse, right. What I didn't know, standing there in the drip, and the thaw with Nell's hand light on my arm, was that the choice was going to be taken clean out of both our hands before the month was up. Because 8 days later, 3 riders came up the trail from the south. And I knew the lead horse before I knew the man. I'd know that horse anywhere. It was the Vance's Good Bay, the one they doubled the wagons behind, and Mr. Vance himself was on it, coming back up the trail he'd left her to die on, coming back for reasons I could not begin to guess. And I stood in my own doorway with my rifle not quite in my hands, and I felt that old cold from the first night come back into the center of me, cold as the storm, cold as a bound foot in a snowbank. Nell came to the door behind me. She saw the bay. I heard her breath stop. "Go inside," I said, very quiet. "Wesley." "Go inside, Nell." I put my hand on the doorframe where the rifle leaned. "Let me count these 3 before they get to the yard." 3 riders in a country like this is a war party or a wedding, and nobody up the Powder River gets married in the thaw. I watched them come. I'd learned to read men on horseback the way I read weather, the way they sat, the way they held their reins, whether the hands hovered near the belt. The 2 behind Vance were hired men, road-worn, indifferent. They rode like men being paid to be somewhere they didn't care about. But Vance himself rode like a man coming to collect a thing he believed was his, and that told me more than any word he could have said. There's a particular set to the shoulders of a man who thinks he's owed. I've thrown such men off my land before. I've never wanted so badly to shoot one. He drew up at the edge of my yard, a respectful distance which surprised me. He was smaller than I'd built him in my head those long weeks. A soft-faced man going gray, good coat, town boots. The kind of man who'd never in his life had to dig a grave in frozen ground or hold a knife over somebody's foot. His eyes went past me to the door, to Nell standing there against my order, and something moved in his face that I couldn't name and didn't trust. "You'd be the man who's got her," he said. "I'd be the man whose land you're standing on," I said. "Say your business from your horse and then get off it." He took his hat off. I hadn't expected that either. He held it against his chest, town manners, and he said, "My name is Harmon Vance. I believe you have in your care a young woman named Nell Sutcliffe, who traveled in my company this past." "I know who she is," I said. "I know who you are. I found her in a snowbank with her foot bound up so neat you could have hung the bandage in a parlor. Real considerate work. You do it yourself or leave that to the missus." His face went a color. Behind him, one of the hired men shifted in his saddle, bored, and I marked where the man's hands were and kept marking them the whole while. "You don't understand the circumstances," Vance said. "I understand her foot rotted, and I took 2 of her toes off with a hot knife 9 days back, and she near died of your circumstances," I said. "I understand fine. What I don't understand is what in God's name would make you ride back up the trail you left her on. Guilt don't usually travel this far in the cold. And here's where it turned. Here's the part I've thought about more than any other in all the years since, because I've never fully settled in my own mind what kind of man Harmon Vance was, and I've decided that not settling it is the honest place to leave it. "My wife is dead," he said. The yard went quiet. Even the eaves seemed to stop dripping. "The pass took 2 of our wagons at the high crossing," he said, and his voice had gone flat and far off, the voice of a man reciting a thing so he doesn't have to feel it. "Water came up under the ice. We lost the Prout family entire. We lost my wife. We lost," his hat crushed slowly in his hands. "We lost my youngest boy, Thomas. He was 6. He looked at me, and for just a moment the ode went out of his shoulders, and there was only a hollowed-out man on a good horse in a cold yard. "I have 2 children left and no woman to mind them, and I am going back down to the settlement to winter what's left of us." And I remembered, his jaw worked. I remembered we'd left the Sutcliffe girl on this trail. And I found I couldn't ride the whole way down without knowing. Whether he couldn't finish it. He didn't have to. I stood there with my hand near my rifle, and I felt the whole shape of my anger shift under me like river ice going soft. And I hated it. I wanted my clean, cold fury back. It had been so much simpler than this. Because now the man who'd left her to die was a man who'd lost his wife and his 6-year-old son to the same pass. Come back up the trail, he'd have every reason to flee, to look on the face of the one death he might yet undo. And I couldn't tell, I still can't tell, whether that made him better than I'd thought, or only sadder, or whether those are the same thing in the end. She lived, I said. It came out rough. No, thanks to you, she lived. Something broke across his face. Relief and shame and grief all fighting for the same small space. Thank God, he said. Thank God. And then, gathering himself, doing the thing I should have known he'd come to do. Miss Sutcliffe, I've come to make it right. I'll pay this man for his trouble, and you'll ride down with us, and there's a place for you minding my two that are left, proper wages this time, and a room of your own, and I'll not, his voice caught. I'll never again ask you to walk. You have my word before God. And he meant it. That's the devil of it. I believe he meant every word. A man can be sincere in his mercy after and still have done the unforgivable thing before, and both are true at once, and there's no ledger clean enough to sort them. He turned to her then, hat in hand, waiting. They were all waiting, Vance, his two bored killers, me with my rifle, the whole cold yard hung on it. And I did the hardest thing I have ever done in my life, harder than the knife, harder than the ride through the storm. I said nothing. I wanted to say everything. I wanted to say, don't you go with him, don't you dare, he left you in the snow, he'll leave you again the day it suits him. I wanted to say, stay here with me, I've got beans and salt pork and a fire, and I'll never once ask you to walk either. And I love you, God help me. I think I've loved you since the mare found the wrong blue in the drift. I had all of it right there behind my teeth. But I'd given her my word, my real word the day of the dripping eaves, that the choosing would be hers. That if I took it from her, even gently, even lovingly, even to save her from a man who'd proven he'd let her die, then I was no better than the hand that bound her foot before it walked away. Love that chooses for you isn't shelter. It's just a warmer cage. She taught me that herself, and now she was standing in my doorway with the whole cold weight of it on her, and the only way I could honor what she'd taught me was to stand there with my mouth shut and let it hurt. So I shut my mouth, and I let it hurt. Nell came out onto the step. She'd left the stick inside. She wanted to stand on her own 2 feet for this, the Mendied one and all, and she did, though I saw what it cost her. She looked at Harmon Vance a long time. She looked at his crushed hat and his hollowed-out face and his good bay horse and his 2 hired men. She looked at the trail south, soft and opening. She looked at the pass. And then she looked at me one long look, and I made my face give her nothing but it's yours to choose, because that was the last gift I had left to give her, and I was determined to give it clean. Mr. Vance, she said, her voice didn't shake. I'm sorry about your wife, I'm sorry about Thomas. He was a sweet boy and he liked when I sang to him, and I'll grieve him honest, whatever else. She drew a breath. And I want you to hear the next part clear, because I'll only say it the once. Vance waited, hat in his hands. You bound my foot, she said, and you left me to die, and you told yourselves it was mercy because you couldn't stand to see it plain. And now you've come back and offered me mercy again, a room and wages, and your word before God, and I believe you mean it. I do believe you, that's the worst of it. You're not a wicked man, Mr. Vance. You're a weak one, and a weak man's mercy runs exactly as far as it's convenient and not 1 inch past, and I have already walked to the end of your mercy once in the snow on a bad foot, alone. She lifted her chin. I'll not do it twice. I'd sooner take my chances with a hard man than a weak one, because at least a hard man tells you where the ground gives out. She turned, she looked at me, and something in her face was asking a question, and I finally understood that the choosing hadn't been only hers, that she'd been waiting to see if I'd stand there and let her have it, if I was the kind of man who could love a person and still not put a hand on the scale. That the shut mouth had been the test, and the silence had been my answer, and she'd heard it. I'll be staying, she said, not to Vance, to me. If the man of this place will have me on, not to be doctored or minded or kept, to stay, there's a difference, and I mean to spend a good long while showing him which. I don't recall crossing the yard. I recall her hand in mine, the strong grip, stronger than it had any right to be. I recall Harmon Vance putting his hat slowly back on his ruined gray head, and nodding once, and turning his good bay horse south toward what was left of his family. And I recall, this is the thing I recall clearest of the whole day, that I felt no triumph watching him go. Only a low, tired ache for all of it. The wife and the boy and the pass and the snowbank and the bound foot, the whole cold arithmetic of a country that binds you kind and leaves you anyway. They rode out, the trail took them, the eaves started dripping again. She's out there right now as I write this. I can hear her through the wall, cussing at the stove the way she does, the dry laugh under it. It's our 19th winter. There are still 119 marks on the beam, and there will only ever be 119, because I never cut another one, because she was right. A man counts the winters he survived, but he'd do better to count what he survived them for, and I only ever needed the one. I've thought a lot about mercy these 19 years, the kind that binds a foot before it leaves, the kind that rides back up a hard trail too late, the kind that keeps its mouth shut in a cold yard and lets the person it loves choose the harder road, because the choosing is the whole of the thing and everything else is just weather. I never did decide what kind of man Harmon Vance was. I've stopped trying. I hope his two are grown and well. I hope he found the end of his own weakness before it cost him again. I don't forgive him and I don't quite condemn him, and I've made my peace with holding both, because Nell taught me a person can be two things at once, and the honest place to stand is right in the middle, in the drip and the thaw, not knowing. The mare's gone now. Juno. She lived to a good old age, and she's buried up the coulee near where she found the wrong blue in the drift, and I put a flat stone over her because she was the best of us. She was the one who wouldn't ride past. I go up there sometimes when the weather lets me. I tell her things. I tell her she was right to stop. Nell's calling me for supper. I can smell it, whatever it is, better than anything I made in 11 years alone. I'm going to set this down now and go in and eat with the woman who chose the hard road and me at the end of it. And I'm not going to tell her I was writing all this out, because she'd only